Welcome to the third 2019 AViD event. I'm Sam Reed, a Des Moines Public Library Foundation board member, and since 2001, there have been 140 AViD events attended by over 47,000 people, like you. AViD would not be possible without input from the Volunteer Selection Committee, the leadership of Tim Pollock, and the community engagement team. Thanks to an outstanding staff at all the locations of the Des Moines Public Library for providing the community with free, relevant, and important resources that are transforming lives every day. The Des Moines Public Library Foundation Executive Director Dory Briles raised funds for AViD, summer reading, and school readiness, programming for children's, teens, adults, new public access, computers, and other library needs. Bringing outstanding authors to AViD, offering program services in the latest technology, and improving library collections takes more than just dollars that we provide. It takes help from a number of different resources. And today, with your gift to the Des Moines Public Library Foundation, and we don't have envelopes, but you're able to give a gift today, we're able to continue these programs. So a few details. Please complete the blue evaluation form. You have that as part of your program. Turn it in at the information table for a chance to win an AViD journal, a signed copy of Nick Nolte's book. Yes, a signed copy of Nick Nolte's book, Rebel, My Life Outside the Lines. Your evaluations help to access future AViD funding. Purchase a book from Beaverdale Books and have your book autographed by the author. Now, events like this would not be possible without our supporters, and we would like to make sure that we thank them, each one of them. So I'm gonna start with this list of volunteers and sponsors who have been a part of making AViD possible. So our premier sponsor, the Des Moines Register, Nationwide Foundation, Principal Financial Group, Brad and Kelly Edmister, Humanities Iowa, a state-based affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, Cultivating Compassion, the Dr. Richard Deming Foundation, Mary Kay and Daniel M. Kelly Family Foundation, O'Brien Fitzpatrick Foundation, Karen Schaff and Steve Jane, Dr. Catherine and Andrew Hauser, Pam Bass, Bookie and Harry Bookie, Shelley and Martin Brody, Mary Ritchie, Douglas and Deborah West, Don Taylor, Judy Blank, and Marianne and Robert Sobiek. Let's give them, exactly. Let's give them a round of applause. I would now like to introduce Sue Woody, who is our library director. It's my pleasure to introduce her. She's a Des Moines native, and she began her role as the director of the library in July of last year.
It's my honor to welcome you all. I'm Sue Woody, director of the library, and I'm very excited because our sound system, our brand new sound system, seems to be working. Can everybody hear me all right? You're going to want to hear every word of our very distinguished author, and it's my honor to be able to introduce him. Nigerian-born author Chigozie Obioma burst into the literary scene in 2015 with his beautiful debut novel, The Fisherman. This won an NAACP Image Award and was named finalist for the prestigious Man Booker Prize. Chigozie was also named one of Foreign Policy's 100 leading global thinkers. Wow. Anticipation was high for his follow-up, therefore, and Chigozie delivered. An Orchestra of Minorities was released this year to critical acclaim. The The Washington Post called it your big novel of the winter, and The Guardian called it a stunning leap forward for the author. This book tells the story of a young poultry farmer in present-day Nigeria living alone without family. One day, he has a fateful encounter with a suicidal woman on a bridge over a swollen river. And as those of you who've read the book know, things take quite a turn from there. This is a brilliant, electrifying book that is complex and epic in scale. It's told in a series of flashbacks delivered by this all-seeing guardian spirit called a chi to a divine jury. In short, this is the kind of novel that assures its author, Chigozie Obioma, that he will be in our literary lives for some time to come. You'll have the opportunity to ask Chigozie some questions after his talk, so please fill out those little white forms inside your program. Volunteers will pick them up later and deliver them to our moderator. And our moderator this evening is Kevin Patrick. Kevin moved to Des Moines as a field organizer for then-Senator Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. And now he's an assistant Polk County attorney here in Des Moines. Thank you, Kevin. And now, please join me in welcoming to the stage the amazing Chigozie Obioma.
Wow, what a reception. You know, sometimes when you're sitting back there and people are saying, you know, as she just did, just like giving all these like wonderful exaggerations about my person, you know, you just wonder, am I actually the one whom they're talking about? So it's a great pleasure to be here. This is my second visit to Des Moines. And I'm, so you guys have been very kind to me, to the Fisherman, and now An Orchestra of Minorities. So I probably should move here. Should I? Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, I appreciate the, organizers and team and the crew who brought me here. And I want to say a big thank you. It is, I see myself as somebody who is just starting, so I don't know how, the mistake or what you guys were thinking of when you decided to put me, with this wonderful cast of writers. So it's sometimes very difficult to talk about this book. Where do you start from? It was an idea I got around 2011, I have to say. Actually, even earlier than that. So the gem of the idea first came to me around 2009 from an actual real-life event that I witnessed. So I'll tell you that event in a minute. But when I started now to think about how to actually tell the story and, the whole mechanics of it, I thought to myself, well, this is insane. Why should I, take on this kind of task? Because creating the chi and the cosmology around it was not something I wanted to do. But there's something that happens every now and then to the stories that make it finally to publication. I write a lot of stories. The Fisherman was not by any chance my first novel. There were probably 4 or 5 even, other manuscripts. But the stories that actually finally, become the real, works somehow come with a bullying pressure. They insist somewhat of being told and in a particular way. So sometimes I become a kind of a galley slave, somebody who has to, just do the bidding of this, very bullish, insistent story. So this was the case with this novel and the way it is told. So let me tell you about the origin of the story and then my aims in writing the novel, what I wanted to achieve. And then I will read an excerpt, and then we can then have a discussion, and you guys can then ask me the questions. So Nigeria is my beloved country, a country I love very deeply. I was there about 3 weeks ago. I visit very frequently, and I like to say that I'm kind of stuck here because I met my wife in Michigan. While I was going to school there, she was from the Detroit, Dearborn area, and I'm kind of stuck in America for a while, or probably forever. But anyway, my heart is also back in Nigeria. So we are known for some great things. Somebody said that every 4 black person is one of every 4 is a Nigerian or something like that. So it is the largest black population in the world, and we are actually very wealthy. It's a major oil supplier. Many of you may not know this, but until 2013, when President Obama, who decided that America it was one of the things he promised when he was campaigning, energy efficiency. He made good, the promise, and America is now not just a producer of gas and oil, but also even an exporter. So until that time, about 15% of the gas and oil consumed here came from Nigeria. Yes, but now we no longer sell to the US. Anyway, so one of the bad things we're known for is that, the emails you get, sometimes. So from fixers and all that. So this thing goes on in different levels. At a meta level, it is, internet fraud, but there are con men everywhere. And there's a phenomenon of people masquerading as agents for universities and schools in, Western countries or wealthier countries. So they lie and deceive people, some who are just like either uninformed or just really vulnerable. And they just tell them, look at, Libya, for instance. Libya is like America, come there and all that. So I was going to college in North Cyprus. So Cyprus is divided, and the part of Cyprus where I was this country that is under UN embargo. It's not a great country, I have to say. And so people would deceive others and say, look, this is a very advanced country, there's everything, there's jobs, like America. And some people came that way. They sold everything they had, thinking they were immigrating to a place where, they will have all these opportunities. So I met this guy, Jay, in 2009, who came that way. And he had been to Germany. He'd lived in Germany before, but he had run-ins with the authorities, and they sent him back home. And so he was very eager to go back to Europe and then settle there. So he came to Cyprus, and on arriving, he became very shattered by what he saw, that this country wasn't better in any way than Nigeria. So he began to, so I witnessed firsthand the internal collapse of a person, psychologically, emotionally, and all that. So on the 5th day of being on the island, he drank very much, and he took a bottle of vodka, this Turkish raki, and climbed the attic of a 4-story building. And I like to imagine that he didn't want to jump. I think that he drank so much and thought he was climbing back down the stairs, but he was actually walking over the building. So he died in a very tragic way. In fact, his body was not discovered until a few days later. It was a stench. We were looking for him everywhere, threatening to burn down Cyprus. We were protesting, thinking, because there's a lot of racism there, thinking one of these guys had, killed him. But they found him. So anyway, in the aftermath of that, I just started to think about what he had mentioned offhandedly during one of the conversations we had. He'd said to me that, he was in love with a woman in Nigeria. And, that was like the major motivating force for him to want to come back and make quick money and go back so that he could marry her. So I just started to ask myself the question, the way most of my stories come to me. Okay, so what happened to this woman? What will how is she going to take this? Would she ever? Did they discuss this? Move? What did she think of it and all that? So I tried to recreate his life. How did they come to the decision, or how did he come to the decision to come to Cyprus that way, and why? So An Orchestra of Minorities is a way for me to explain that. So I just created, this story about this guy who, because he wanted the approval of, her family, decides to make this journey. So that was the origin of the story. So the aims in creating the story is, I wanted to ask these questions. So the way I write is that I observe something, or I hear something, or I witness something, and then I frame all these philosophical questions, and the fiction becomes how I attempt to answer those questions. The Fisherman was born that way, for instance. It was just me asking myself, what is it that can turn the love that a brother has for the other, or a sibling, that sacred bond that they have? What can turn that love not just into something else, but hatred? I wanted to the opposite. And, I came up with this idea of a prophecy. And so that was how the Fisherman was born. So also somebody told me a long time ago, an old man I met on a bus, we're traveling, and he was like, so he had some very bad experiences. And so he was just like saying all kinds of things in the bus. He was like he was a little unhinged, I have to say. And at some point he said, so nobody was actually listening to him because people thought he was a nuisance. But I was listening to everything he was saying very carefully. And at some point he asked a question. He said, hey, who can tell me if we were to plot the graph of life, what would it look like for most people? Would it be a straight line? Would it be like a kind of a convex, nobody said anything. He said it would be zigzag, So you rise and fall, you rise and fall, and you rise again until the end. So this is what informs, the bleak turn that the life of Chinonso takes in the novel. All right, so all I've said so far would make you feel like this is a novel told in a traditional way. But sadly, it's not. Again, I was crazy enough to decide that I wanted to write a cosmological novel. So at Michigan, I became exposed to Paradise Lost by John Milton. And I said to myself, there's something about the way in which we Africans haven't embraced westernization very deeply. We tend to dismiss our own heritage and the many complex worldviews and culture that we still have. It's just there to explore. And I said to myself, even people of my dad's generation, most of them don't seem to know about the Chi, which is at the center of the Igbo worldview. So if you look at Western civilization, you will see that the idea of free will, for instance, cannot be thought of as a myth. Why? Because you can trace many institutions to that idea. Liberal democracy, even liberalism itself, the idea of choice. You always have freedom, whether it's the French Revolution, liberté, always talking about this. But that used to be so with, say, the Igbo fundamental axiom of dualism. So the central ideology in the Igbo culture is where one thing stands, another thing will stand beside it. So what it means is that the Igbos conceive that there's nothing that can stand by itself. Everything has a kind of duplicate. So if there is a corporeal entity of some sort, then there must definitely be an incorporeal version in metaphysical space. So in the imagination of the Igbo in West Africa, there is no difference really between the world of the living and the unliving or the dead. So they meld together. It is us who have to discover it. So so after reading Paradise Lost, I said to myself, well, maybe I can write something like that. And at the center of all that is the Chi. So these days we still name people Chigozie, Chinua, Chinonze, So a kind of a vocation or a kind of a plea to the Chi. And so we kind of still believe in it, but not as, it used to be in pre-colonial times. So when, at the time of which these belief systems were instantiated in institutions, for instance, the Igbo did not have 85% of Igbo towns and villages did not have a monarchical system. They had an egalitarian structure in which old age was approximate to wisdom. So what happened was the oldest people in each kindred sent a representative, either the oldest man or woman, to represent them at the village council. So they gathered together. That was how decisions were made. So in fact, the British had a hard time colonizing Igbo land because of that. Because what they did was they came in with the cannon, if they want to be aggressive, and they just marched to the palace of the king or queen or whoever, and the people surrender. Or they came with some kind of edit for you to sign. The interpreter, because the people didn't speak English, of course. The interpreter would just say, the queen says that, we want friendship with you. While actually the edit says that you're signing away your land, to the sovereignty of the queen. And the people were, of course, yes. And they sign it away. And then the next day, the British comes with with their officers and say, well, this land is mine. I'm going to build a railway station. The people are shocked. What do you mean by that? But you signed the document. So anyway, there was no palace to go into when they came to Igbo land. So what they had to do was create what they called autonomous leaders, district commissioners. So if you've read Achebe's Things Fall Apart, you will remember, the hated district commissioner who was created by the British to impose so that they could have what they called indirect rule on the people. So these belief systems were not just folklore or myth. They were concretized in institutions before colonialism. And so the third aim was also to tell the story of how Africans are treated in some of these countries they go to, in countries where they are unwanted, as is the case with North Cyprus. In fact, just before I read, I have to say that just a few days ago, for whatever reason, because of the visibility of my work, the African students who are still in Cyprus write to me frequently when something happens to them, hoping that I could be some kind of advocate, even though I don't. I mean, sometimes there's nothing I can do about it. But I've just written, with a journalist and a photographer, a kind of lengthy investigative piece for foreign policy. So it will be out, I think, next week or so. So you will be able to see that. So anyway, so in the novel, you see Chinonso is jailed and is treated horribly in Cyprus. So some of you have heard about how some people are even enslaved in Libya. So this is some of the experiences we go through because our politicians have refused to allow for development, adequate development to happen, even though I think that Nigeria especially is improving, I'll say. All right, so I will read an excerpt from An Orchestra of Minorities, a 5-minute excerpt, and then you guys can ask me questions. So again, the Chi, the guardian spirit, is telling this story. The Chi, very quickly, is a reincarnating spirit that has that ensouls this character and has been coming and going for 600, 700 years, or thereabout. So it's his voice you hear. Akataka, in this state of anguish, my host walked towards the city. Its expanse, its world opened before him like a great cosmic secret. Desert, desert, he heard again and again, from his friends Titus, Linus, Tobe, and even Jamaica, as the one word that adequately described this landscape. But what is a desert? A desert is a place of abundant but loose earth. In the land of the great fathers, it is hard to scoop earth from the ground. Something firmed it to the ground. Perhaps the frequent rain and made it difficult for it to come off so easily. One has to scratch or dig to scoop the earth. But here, not so. The very stepping of one's feet worried the ground and whipped up dust. No sooner has one walked a distance than one's shoes become covered in this darkish clay. And it spreads and runs about everywhere, accommodating little vegetation and resisting most of what seeks to plant its root, to vegetate here. Thus, that which grows in it is tough and resilient. The olive tree, for instance, a tree that does not need water to grow, except whatever it can obtain from the deep beneath the soil. For the country sits on water. Every other thing that inhabits this land must subdue it. There must be a struggle, a hemispheric battle in which huge stones, hills, mountains, rocks find their way here or emerge from some immensity beyond all knowledge and crush the enemies of earth and dust and insist that here on this place I must stand, and so it will always be. So I must say, though, that in this it shares affinity with the land of the great ancestors, where the earth, in its fecundity, exhibits an exuberance that marks the desert. So my host walked for what must have been half an hour with the strides of the slightly drunk until he arrived at an alley of houses. The longing to reach the city was in his mind like the thirst for water in a desert. He wanted to reach there and find the nearest bus station where he could wait to be picked up. Presently, he sauntered into the half-closed mouth of a street which wound down inwards, away from the long main road as if in fear. It seemed to be a poor neighborhood, for the houses were low-roofed and old, their facades strewn with flower-bearing plants firm to the clay-colored earth. An uprooted gate leaned against a wall in front of one of the houses, and a man stood on a ladder stretched against the walls, nailing something into it. Across on the other side of the road, overlooking a bridge, was a deep crater that stretched for kilometers, the earth rising in sinuous rows towards what seemed to be a more developed part of the city. He followed the trail, tired, half mad, walking against the wheel of his heart, past empty houses that sat like shadows in the sun, the sweat-soaked fabric he wore sticking to his skin. He heard itinerant voices of people he could not see. Birds he'd never seen before plunged across the plains and sailed at unhurried pace. Ebunu. As soon as he advanced around the bend where the road turned back right towards the main one, he was jolted by a shout of approaching voices. He turned, and a group of children, having burst out of a gate from a compound, for he saw the small gate swinging now, came rushing towards him, shouting what sounded like Abi, Abi. And then, Ronaldinho, Ronaldinho. Chukwu. In the moment between the closing of an eye and its reopening, my host was in the midst of a thronging mob full of noise and push that was speaking in an unfamiliar language. A hand tugged at his faded sports shirt from behind, and before he could turn in the direction, another pulled its hem. And before he could, someone shouted in his ear, and before he could make sense of what had been said to him, he was submerged in a well of words. Agunjiegbe. He stamped his feet on the ground, waved his arm about to free himself from the grabbing hands, and in the dim reprieve, he realized that he was thick-headed in a mob of curious boys. The recognition shocked him, and in that instant, he yelled that they deceased. He clutched his bag with one hand and raised the other hand, swung himself from a grip, and staggered. But the boys behind him stepped back from him like scared flies. He clenched his teeth, raised his hand, and landed it on the first head he could reach. He stepped back as quickly as he could, and in the quick moment, he was free. The children, what are they? From where had they come? Could they not see that he bore no resemblance to Ronaldinho? Did they not know also that Ronaldinho could not possibly be here like him, eviscerated, a walking shell of what he had been just a week before? Now, one of the children stepped forward, motioned to the others to back off. This one was dressed in shorts and a singlet, taller than the rest. This boy started saying something and gestured to the small boy who was carrying a ball. Then he demonstrated to my host that he wanted signatures. Another brought a pen and a book. They all gestured, and it became clear to him that their hectoring would cease quickly if he heeded their request. So he took the ball to sign it, and as he did, an image he'd once seen at the back of his father's house in the village came into his mind to insult him. It was a shell that must have belonged to a big snail, now empty, dried, moving slowly away. At first, it had seemed like a miracle when he saw it, But when he examined it closely, he saw that it was being ferried by a team of ants. He felt now that that same thing was happening to him now, in this poor neighborhood, in this strange country, where these children had mistaken him for the best footballer in the world. They did not know that he was a man of great poverty, a man whose poverty extended beyond the diameter of time. In the past, he owned nothing. In the present, he owned nothing. And in the prospected future, nothing. And here he was with the pen one of these kids had offered him, signing ball, books, shirts, even their palms. At the time, many years ago, he'd screamed at the sight of the moving shell carried by the borrowed legs of an army of ants. In wonder, he had called for his mom to come and see it. But now, at the lifting of himself before the eyes of these strange boys, he broke down and wept. The impact of these tears was immediate. When the children noticed that he, Ronaldinho, was crying, they stopped dead. Here was a great footballer doing what children were prone to do. It was a dead giveaway. And one after the other, the small hands withdrew, the voices went silent, the cheerful eyes were replaced with perplexity, and the feet that encircled him like a silent subterranean army withdrew. He turned from them and continued on his way, sobbing as he went. Thank you very much.
Testing. Good evening, everyone. As my introduction indicated or told, I am an assistant Polk County attorney. And a part of that is that I have trial work. And the first 2 pages of this novel are captivating because I imagine the Chi telling the story, right, he's on trial, he's pleading his case to the judges and juries of these other deities. And from there, it just takes off. So starting with the obvious, why or explain the title?
Oh, yeah. So I think okay. So one of the most surreal events of my childhood, and not just my childhood, like you see all the time, is witnessing hawks preying on chickens. Like they're always the stray chickens, hen and its chicks often walking around the neighborhood. You see that a lot. And they're kites and hawks, those predator birds. They are always preying on them. You see them hanging on this, the terminal, priming their target. And once they strike, what happens is often very moving. So the chickens cannot do very much. They're very weak birds compared to a hawk or an eagle. So what the cry they let out in Igbo language is what I have translated with much liberty as An Orchestra of Minorities. What it actually means is, it is actually, if I were to translate correctly, it will mean something like the crying of like little things, but I felt like An Orchestra of Minorities sounded, I mean, you probably agree with me. Yeah. So, I mean, is that, but also that's a metaphor for how, the rich and all that, the powerful people in society prey on, those who are not.
First question from the crowd is, was it difficult to write a story so steeped in Nigerian Igbo tradition while you were living and working in Lincoln, Nebraska?
Great question. Well, no, because my mom's father was somebody who, he was like one of those who did not convert to Christianity until he died. He was a very serious traditionalist. So she grew up in this rare home because, that's like a dying breed, really. So he was steeped in that. So my mom grew up learning a lot about Ordinary and the Igbo worldview. And she would always say something like, if something bad happened to any of us, maybe we took ill or something, she would say something like, well, this is a result of the transaction between him and his chi. So I was always thinking about the chi, and I would ask a lot of questions. But yeah, I did a lot of research to write this book because I wasn't inventing, it's not fantasy, I wasn't inventing a cosmology. It was, I wanted to be true to what is actually, a real worldview or culture of a people.
Going along with that, this is a story about Chinoso, but this seems to be a story about his chi as well. I mean, the chi is old. He's traveled to the new world. He's traveled to the old. I mean, so did you intend that to be as much as a story about Chinoso as it was about his chi?
Yes, it is a story of both. So the chi has done an unusual thing. It has left the body of the host when the host is not yet dead. So it's not supposed to do that. But this is an extraordinary situation because Chinonso has supposedly, the chi is not 100% sure of this, has committed what it suspects to be an egregious act for which it will be punished because in the Igbo pantheon, the greatest god, or goddess is Allah, the goddess of the earth, which is also the goddess of fertility. And so if you harm somebody who is pregnant, is sacrilegious. Death is the penalty. So it's trying to explain away something that is, it cannot really explain. So it's also trying to absolve itself of all blames. Oh, I was a good chi, I was trying to, so it's very loquacious. It goes on these tangents for endless times. So it's a story about itself. It gives its own history as well. And through the mouthpiece of the chi, I'm also able to, chronicle or chart the history of the Igbo civilization through time, landmark events. There's a time the chi ensows a character who was there when the Europeans first came, one who was enslaved and came actually to the US here, and Biafra, some of these historical landmark events.
So some of the themes that I noticed throughout the book were this idea of destiny and fate versus free will. Can you talk about, I guess, the Chi's view on that dichotomy and Chinoso even dealing with them?
Yeah, so there's a paradox in the Igbo worldview about that. So the Chi is often frustrated, or at least it suggests to the reader, and of course the jury in cosmic space, that it wants to direct its host on a particular, more fruitful course of action, but it cannot because the Chi cannot compel its host against its will, So I think there's a where the worldview is at a crossroad between determinism and fatalism. So the Chi can initiate thoughts and all that. So there could be some intervention from, should I say, metaphysical space, but there has to be some kind of agreement between the individual and its Chi. So the Igbo say onye kwe chi ekwe, which means that if you affirm a thing, then your Chi also will affirm it. So there is some kind of determinism, but we also believe that if you want to achieve something, say I want to become, a prosecutor, and I'm striving, doing all this work that I needed to do to get there, and your Chi is lazy and it's just sleeping, are not doing a comparable amount of effort, then you're just striving in futility. So there has to be a synchronous, amount of hard work.
That it seems like the Chi tried to use the story of the Odyssey a couple of times. Penelope and Odysseus and that return to his love. Where did that come from? Why was that the one of the motivating tools?
Well, I read the Odyssey very, 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 very early in life, probably at 13 or 14 or thereabout. But, I've seen a few people, like critics, say that, well, this is like a recreation of the Odyssey. If it sells copies, well, maybe. But but it wasn't intended to be so. I don't know. I just felt like the Chi being these character who acquires all this knowledge has in some ways read widely through all these other hosts that it has ensouled or across time. So it will probably find something to a kind of a motivating story. Oh, look, you have to continue looking for her and something like that. So look at the story of this guy, so it was just like a tool to nudge Chinonso to keep waiting or looking for Ndali. I mean, towards the end of the novel, it also cites a Shakespearean, play, the murder of, what was the character now? I think it's, I've forgotten, but I think it's Brutus. No, Julius Caesar. Yes, that's right.
So another kind of theme that seemed to, how about this? What were the themes that you wanted the reader to be aware of? Because there are definitely some hard-hitting points in the novel. So what kind of themes did you want the reader to follow?
The novel is full of a lot of things. It's a gallimaufry of things. Well, I think the obvious ones are what you've just mentioned, fate and destiny. Going back to the origin story, the story that inspired the novel, I always ask myself, why do bad things happen to us when we don't seem to deserve it? I always remember the story of a drive-by shooting, that occurred. I don't know where, but somebody told me about it. There was this 9-year-old girl who was like writing her homework at home, and these guys were shooting each other somewhere along the road, and a bullet hit through the roof and killed her. She didn't even know about it. She was just doing her thing. So just like that guy, that Jay, I was just asking myself, what could have happened differently? Is there a way to explain the fate, the fact that of all the people who came to Cyprus in similar circumstances, he is the one who ends up in a body bag, the way he did. So that's a very prominent theme, and I've even in The Fisherman, I've been writing about this for quite a while. But there's exile, there's immigration, there's racism as well, a lot of which he encounters in Cyprus. I think we talk a lot about racism here in the US and in some Western countries, but, I don't know if I would say Cyprus is a Western country, but, in places like that as well, we see a lot of that. And class is a big thing in Nigeria, and in fact, I think that is at the very center of the novel. It is, Chinonso is destroyed by wanting upward mobility, you could say. That's what, he's not supposed to be in this class, but he wants to put himself there, and it destroys him, I have to say. If that's a spoiler, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions about your writing process. What is the hardest part of writing a new story? So the way is actually, for me,
so I get an idea. Maybe, for instance, something happens that stays with me, like, the origin story, and then I think about it a lot. There's a gestation or incubating process you have, if I should use that term. It stays there for a while and gathers itself. A time during which I don't do any writing. I don't write the story down. It can take a long time. Sometimes, for 2 years, I'm thinking about a story all in my head until it's fully formed. Then I write it all down, and then I expand. If it's a novel, if it's a short story, then it's fully contained. So I think the hardest part is during that time, not losing focus and just allowing the story to build itself, to a point where I can now say, well, I think it's now time to give birth to the story, if I can use that analogy. So yeah, and also revising and knowing, where I want the story to go and end there can be difficult at times.
So the next is where and when do you write? So when you're in this process of, in that incubation phase, you have to work, you're still teaching. So where and when do you actually get a chance to sit down and write?
Early in the mornings, mostly. Yeah, but I have a way of forcing myself to create time, because if the work is calling me to write it, I just create time, really. I sometimes could wake up at midnight and just write, if that's when I find the space. So I rearrange my life around a particular project. So it's very fluid, so there's no given routine necessarily.
So based on the success of your books, are you finding that to be a teacher is creating more pressure? And what in your success are you able to teach your students in their writing process?
I don't know if I'm able to teach them anything. The thing is, they always think that if you write 1 or 2 books that are well received, then you know how to teach others how to write. I don't know, to some extent, I guess I have experience. So, but sometimes I feel like, I'm not actually teaching them anything, but then they say that I am. So I don't know. You'll have to ask my students, I guess.
Going back to the novel itself, this is a great question. If revenge is Shinoso's motivation after leaving prison, spoiler, what was his true motivation before? Was it really love?
Well, I think that there's a mystery sometimes to some kind of love. So Ndali is a high-class person, student of pharmacology, and she suspects from the very beginning of their meeting that this will go wrong, and she doesn't, but when she visits him, I suspect that, she sees that this guy has done this thing. He's such a humble, lowly person, and there's something that is fascinating to her about his, being a poultry farmer and all these things, and being so lonely, and she wants to help him. I think that's some of the, rationale for them being together. But, so really his motivation is then, on the reverse, is to, he finds himself with this woman who is so above him, and believes that, he has to do everything to keep her, and also wants to have a companion in his life. And so that's really why he's willing to really give up everything. At the beginning, he exemplifies that by throwing his chicken into the river. That's not a spoiler, because that's the first thing you read, even if you're skimming through. So that continues. I feel like.
I mean, but that changes, right? Because when they first meet, he's the one saving her,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden,
Yeah. So it changes. I mean, yeah. So which is also the thing. So the emotional motility of this guy, he becomes almost deranged, by novels and he, so what is love becomes an obsession, and then it becomes resentment in a way. So we see the full arc, come full circle.
question is, when did you decide that you wanted to be a writer?
Okay. Well, it's kind of a long story, but I wrote a piece for the New York Times in December, which actually got some good read. It's called, so it's really how I became a writer. It was from my parents telling me stories and asking me, usually in hospitals, because I wanted to be a soccer player. I wanted to, that was my dream. So I was playing a lot of soccer, and, I'll play into the night, and my parents, would be like, well, you should come home and all that. And, there was this period where I was playing in this particular place that was like very swampy and prone to mosquitoes. And I would take ill from malaria and end up in the hospital. And, during those times, they would just tell me stories. They asked me to close my eyes. So it was from, creating these worlds, envisioning them in my mind. And, that was how the landscape of my imagination really, opened up. And so I found myself, starting to produce my own stories.
Was that motivated by a chi?
Maybe.
I think this world that you created, it doesn't seem like, or it seems that it's possible that you can have a second. Did you intend for this story to be epic in scale, or do you think this is kind of one book in isolation?
Oh no, I don't think I could ever write a thing like that. Like that would continue. I feel like, yes, it ends at a particular point in the life of this man. He's on this road and traveling, oblivious to the supposed damage he has done. But I think that's the window also into the reader, trying to imagine for themselves, okay, what would happen? What actually happened? Because even the chi itself does not really know. It's just making conjectures and guessing as to. And that's one of the reasons why it is so anxious to go and tell the story, in the cult of the high God. So I hope that there will be a window for the reader to imagine, create your own series maybe, or follow up.
And then the question is, what is anything in the incubation stage now?
Well, nothing. No, nothing. I mean, here and there, I'm writing an essay about the Notre Dame fire and how, people in the West still cherish their heritage, but we don't. If people have been talking about some activists in Nigeria, for instance, have been saying, go and get back some of the bronze heads and artifacts that have been, that are in the UK. You saw some of them in the Black Panther, for instance. And, some people would just say, oh, why are you so archaic? Why are you thinking of so they just feel like these things are meaningless. But then, we like to mimic and imitate Western countries. But look at France. France is going to rebuild that stuff. So why don't we cherish, some of this? So, I'm writing stuff like that. After finishing a book, I try not to, I have ideas. I won't say that I don't, but I just try to take my time with the, I'm working on something, but I'm not focusing on it at all. I don't want to do fiction for now. Yes.
Okay, I think that would wrap it up. I would say that our next AViD series is May 2nd here at Central Library. That will be with Sarah Smarsh. I can only say thank you. I'm honored to even share the stage with you. Your book was awesome. And thank you to AViD Library.